Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Ground and Root podcast. I am your host and holistic cancer dietitian, Dion DeTraz. I am so excited to be here with you today. I have a very special guest. As many of you know, one of my goals with this show is to bring on other people to interview. Some of those people are experts in the world of holistic or natural therapies or integrative tools, as well as stories from people who use many of the strategies we talk about on this show to support their recovery. And this month, we are focusing on the hallmarks of an anti-cancer diet. So I felt like this was a perfect person to bring in this theme because she took this to heart, obviously, in her own recovery story, but she also ended up creating a business out of it afterwards. So I think this is really a beautiful story to highlight this month. I'm going to give just a very quick intro to welcome Maria onto the show, and then I'm going to let her tell you more about her story. But we have Maria Uspenski with us today. She is founder of the Tea Spot and author of several tea-related books, including Cancer Hates Tea, and co-author of 101 Teas to Steep Before You Die. She also has a new book coming out this summer that I had the honor of receiving an early review of, and I'm excited for that to be out in the world as well. She started the Tea Spot after experiencing personally the health benefits of tea during her cancer recovery. And then she's made it her mission to bring the benefits of tea to more people. So, obviously, we're going to talk about tea, and hopefully it's going to expand beyond because we've already talked a little bit about the benefits of green tea and matcha. I think these are sort of the more researched one, but there's so much behind tea that I'm excited for us to dive into. So without further ado, welcome, Maria. I'm so happy to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I'm really so pleased to be here.
Great.
I'm a big
Wonderful.
fan of this podcast, and this is truly so right up my alley.
Oh, thank you, Maria. I appreciate that. Why don't we go ahead and just start with your story, maybe even like before T Spot. Just tell us a little bit about you and, when you were diagnosed and kind of what your journey has looked like to where we are today.
Yeah. So I don't know how far to go back. So I do come from a tea drinking family. My family has Russian roots, and tea, but really always black tea, was always a
Mm.
part of even evening get-togethers. So it's interesting when people talk about caffeine intolerance. I'm thinking, wow, we were drinking black tea after dinner almost every day, and somehow it didn't stunt my growth or prevent me from sleeping. However, now I do feel, on that note, a little more sensitive to caffeine, so I only drink decaffeinated teas after about 5 p.m. But aside from that, I grew up in an artistic family. I grew up around a lot of musicians and singers and dancers. And I also went to school for both piano and for ballet for the first part of my life. And then I got injured as a ballerina and was sent to a high school across the ocean in France, where you live. And I was very resentful about being there, but I did get my French high school baccalaureate degree in math and physics, and then came back to the States. And now I'm very grateful for my time in France in retrospect. But I came back, went to an engineering school, worked for IBM for a decade, and then started my own business and sold that business after 8 years. And within 2 years of selling that business, or maybe within a year of selling that business, my dad died of heart disease very suddenly. And then 2 years after that point, my mother and I both developed cancer, ovarian cancer. And so that was, of course, a whole different route that my life took for a few years. My girls were in middle school. And my only goal at that time was to see them get through high school. That was kind of my biggest aspiration. And my little one, knowing this, didn't tell me blatantly, but actually accelerated her getting out of high school in order
Mm.
to, she got out in 3 years to help me meet my goal because we're very goal oriented in this family. So now, fast forward 21 years, 22 years coming up on this summer from when I got my no evidence of disease prognosis. Both of my daughters, who became classical musicians, are now working at the Tea Spot. So thank you, COVID,
Oh,
for that. And it's really my biggest privilege and pleasure to be able to work with them every day. They are outstanding human beings and just out amazing at their jobs as well and very good with people. So it's a real honor to be able to know that my business will have them moving forward,
I
regardless
love that.
of how I go or when I go. This is an important, a very
Yeah.
nice move. And in fact, it's now the year of the horse, and I'm drinking my favorite horsey tea or black pu'er, but we have discussed that the year of the horse, it's the year of the fire horse, it's the young
Hmm.
fire horse, is very much about change and fast energy. And so they're both embracing the fact that it's kind of a time for them to be able to show themselves more in the leadership of the company. So that's a fun moment that
Love
we're
that.
all at. But back to learning about the health benefits of tea, of other teas other than
Hmm.
just black tea. And I might make a tiny segue just to mention that
Sure.
green tea is what comes up in the literature most often. And there are two good reasons for that. First of all, the catechin polyphenols. So all teas, be it black, green, oolong, white, pu'er, have about 240 milligrams of polyphenol antioxidants per 2 grams of leaves that you would steep up. So the same total amount of antioxidants. However, green teas are heavier in the catechin polyphenols, which include EGCG, so kind of the real cancer fighting stars, so to speak. However, they also get more of the limelight in their wellness, in the wellness space, because it's the Japanese who have been very good since World War II. And in particular, it's a study that came out taking a look at women who had breast cancer after the bombing of Hiroshima that showed that those who drank 3 or more cups of, and they all drink green tea per
Hmm.
day, were virtually immune to the effects of radiation if they weren't taken out by first radiation, or, hit. And that to me was enough to say, I at the time thought that my cancer was entirely environmental, that I must have been living near something god awful, and had no idea that it might potentially have some emotional ties because my lifestyle, I thought, was perfectly active and clean and all those good things. But it's the Japanese who only drink green tea who have done the bulk of the research. So a lot of the studies are focused on that. These days, there's a lot more study coming out of India and China, and in China, of course, the majority of teas produced and consumed are also green, but there's a lot of focus on the pu'er teas from Yunnan, which is what I am choosing as my kind of personal signature year of the horse tea. One of the reasons being because that it kind of smells horsey, so that makes it fun, but it's also very steadying. If you're in a high energy, high fire year, this one is very steadying in terms of its energy. So I digress, but
No,
I
I
did
love
learn a
that.
lot about the health benefits of tea. Honestly, it was a doctor who simply said to me, you might go across the street and try some tea. And there was a Citibank building across from the hospital where I had just gone, and had this wonderful little, there were a chain of shops. I think there's probably only one left these days, or maybe two in Boston and Providence. This one was in New York, and it's called Tea Lux. And they had a lot of whole leaf teas, and it was the first time that I'd walked into a shop like that, and I was just blown away.
Hmm.
And the person behind the counter, when they saw me, said, what is it? Why do they send all the cancer patients over here? They didn't even make the connection. And they were somewhat disappointed to be entertaining cancer patients instead of just good-looking people who'd walked off of Third or Lexington. Yeah.
That's actually pretty enlightening of the doctors at the cancer clinic telling people to go over and start drinking tea. I'm actually quite impressed by
Absolutely.
that, especially 20 years ago, because that's how long
Yes.
it
Yeah.
was.
Totally.
Amazing.
Agreed. And I think it may have stemmed from a complaint that I made about the coffee.
Oh, okay. That's
Coffee
funny.
is just terrible in here. And there's like, oh, why don't
He's
you go
like,
try
go
some tea?
get
And there's
some
a good
tea.
place across the street. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so that was kind of your, obviously you had a background in tea, like tea was a normal part of your life, but that was that is that when you sort of dove
Well,
into the more
that
specific
there I
research?
was still more focused on just recovery, and I was really
Yeah.
just listening a lot to what I was being told by people who knew a lot more than me.
Hmm.
Frankly, I really dove into tea right after in a huge way. And that was, it's very scary. And I think you've even spoken about this in your podcasts. I know I've heard about this somewhere. It's very scary when all of a sudden you get your no evidence of disease. Obviously, it's the most grateful day of your life.
Yeah.
However, you're thinking, okay, my body has failed me in a big way once. Granted, it stepped up to this challenge to get to where I am today, but you feel like, okay, I have this demerit. I have this, I don't want to call it a handicap. I have this, but I have this, my body could be prone to getting this again.
Hmm.
And they make that very clear that this is not the end game. This is just the beginning of a whole new chapter. And I got very focused, and you're feeling slightly better day by day. So you do have more energy. I am very analytical by nature and I love to read. So I just did as much research as I could. And of course, this is, before there were tons of information on the internet, but you could still get to a lot of academic papers on the health benefits of tea. And there was already a pretty great critical mass of them, but more and more each year. And it was very apropos, very of the moment at that time. So I think I also hit that wave at the right time. Similarly, there weren't a lot of great tea shops like this one that kind of blew me away, Tea Lot. And I
Hmm.
thought, this is interesting. They make it very clear that fresh, high quality whole leaf tea is what's important. And in particular, I want these nice, very potent Japanese green teas and matchas, which in general at that time we didn't have a lot of. Now you can't walk into a cafe without hearing someone order a matcha latte. And it's probably comes from pretty good quality matcha. But I thought this is unfortunate that in my country, people who are faced with this same challenge as me don't have great access to great teas. And literally, I did not expect to start another business. Never in a million years did I expect to start a tea business. My background was in tech, but next thing I know, I'm lying in bed and I go, how'd this happen? I have employees. All of a sudden, I had a tea business because, frankly, I would have shouted off every rooftop to every female, look, here's this wonderful, inexpensive, substance which can not only help your body from a molecular standpoint, but really does make you feel good and brings wonderful, steadying energy into your life. And for me, at least, and for many others, I believe it's a much more palatable way to get your caffeine in during the day, your energy lift, without compromising your more quiet and focused moments, and then most importantly, your rest at the end of the day.
I was just thinking of a couple of questions to follow up, and I don't want to get ahead of myself. So one, I'm going to take a one like little sidetrack question because I have also seen in the research, and we're going to move on from green tea eventually, but since
Yeah.
we've talked about it already, I have also seen in the research that the Japanese varieties of green tea do seem to have higher concentrations of the catechins, higher concentrations of EGCG. Is that accurate? Is that something that you've also seen and you would recommend if you're going to do green tea, you do Japanese variety?
So let's start first with matcha versus leaf tea. So
Okay.
matcha, of course, being a powdered tea, does have about 3 times more EGCG than any green leaf tea, whether that's from China, Thailand, Vietnam, Korea, or Japan.
Okay.
The Japanese, and then the second piece, I would really have to say the Japanese green teas, Japan focuses very much on quality. How to say this? Japanese green teas are definitely higher in chlorophyll. It's less wildly sunny there than it is in many parts of China where green tea is grown. And so when your plant is deprived of light, it produces more chlorophyll looking for sunlight. And so, in
Mm.
particular, there are even Japanese green teas, the really high-end Gyokuro leaf green teas that are shaded the last few weeks
Mm.
of their growing season in order to make them, again, people weren't looking to make them more chlorophyll heavy for health reasons. It's because it produces this outstanding umami flavor and wonderful round mouthfeel that the Japanese so appreciate in a lot of their cuisine and in particular in their teas. So, yes, Japanese green teas are definitely almost always higher in chlorophyll. Matcha
Okay.
is definitely 2 to 3 times more pronounced in EGCG than any leaf green tea. But after that, the next most important factor is how early in the spring was it picked?
Mm.
So after the plant has been dormant, and in both Japan and China, the plants are dormant. They have a winter. They don't produce year round as they do in some tea growing regions like Sri Lanka or Colombia. But after they're dormant and the first plants come up, we know
Mm.
that always from our garden as well. Those first shoots on the trees in your garden are the most vibrant. And they are the best endowed with all of these polyphenol antioxidants. So I'd have to say that after the matcha difference, really, the difference is how early was your tea
Okay.
picked. And there are some very catechin forward Chinese green teas, but then anything, for instance, that would end up most probably in your Moroccan green tea is picked much
Hmm.
later because that then gets blended with mint and
Right.
people are less fussy about what that green tea is. But
Right.
yeah, in general, if you get a fresh early season and the Japanese green teas are also pretty well documented in terms of there are
Mm.
actual terms like shincha means a very early sencha. So you know that if you're drinking a shincha, that it is probably higher in polyphenol antioxidants than something that is a sencha that's made later, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, my gosh,
Sorry for that
there's
long
so many
segue.
nuances. No,
There
I
are.
appreciate it though, just
Yeah,
because you're obviously an expert in tea. You've taken a lot of time to research all
I
of this.
love
So
it.
I
There's so
appreciate it.
much. Every day I learn more.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, let's move forward because I want to think about, I feel like in the cancer world, we definitely talk about green tea a lot, like that most people have heard that
Yes.
to some degree that it's a good thing to do. But there are a lot of different types of tea, right? So would you take a minute just to kind of bring us all to the same level of understanding of what are the different teas? What are the general differences of tea?
Absolutely. And especially in North America, one of the distinctions that is very delicate to make is we tend to call a lot of things tea. So after Cancer Hates Tea came out in 2016, I did a lot of talks on tea and health in the next couple 2 to 3 years. And I would often ask at the end, what is your favorite tea? And here I've given a talk for, 45 minutes on the health benefits of tea. And people will undoubtedly raise their hands and say peppermint, chamomile. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, okay, how do I broach the fact that this is not tea?
Technically tea,
And
yeah.
there were many more people in the tea industry who were very even borderline rude about letting people know that's not tea. If you call it tea, it's tea. For you, it's tea.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
technically speaking, to be tea, you need to come from the leaves of the Camellia sinensis plant, and then you're right. There are still a gazillion
Hmm.
varieties, thousands of them, and the five major types are six major types we say in 101 teas are pu'er tea, which is the aged and fermented tea, which is bacteriologically active, which has amazing benefits for digestion. So that is a very favorite morning tea. And at the Tea Spot, we actually blend that into a lot of our breakfast blends. And people become very devoted fans of them because they get used to that nice digestive push in the morning, so to speak. Then there are black teas, which are more oxidized than green teas. So a green tea leaf, you can pick it in the morning and it doesn't oxidize. You dry it out and you have tea by the evening. A black tea sits out there and oxidizes longer. Think about slicing an apple or a banana. They turn brown. So does a tea leaf, right? It doesn't start out
Hmm.
brown on the bush. It on the tree. It starts out obviously as a nice fresh green leaf always, but the longer you allow it to oxidize, the darker it gets. So then that black tea category. Then we've got oolong teas that are really range in oxidation between 20 and 80%, with black teas being more than 80%, green teas being less in general. And
Hmm.
oolongs are very complex and have the most intricate kind of manufacturing practices associated with the production of the tea after those leaves are wilted and taken off and have oxidized a bit. And the countries that are best known for oolong teas are Taiwan and China, but now places are starting to make them more all around the globe because it is such an interesting category. And then, of course, we've got our green teas and then white teas, which are literally plucked the morning before. Oftentimes the tea leaf would unfurl is when white silver needles are plucked. I don't know if you've ever looked at that tea, but those
No.
leaves are nice and long and almost still kind of curled up and have a lot of peach fuzz on the outside. They literally look like they were frozen in time from a very fresh tea shrub. So all of those different types, and then there's a type that we practically don't speak about in the States, and that's why I don't talk about it in Cancer Hates Tea, but we do because we're very by the book and 101 teas. Yellow tea is a special category in my mind of green tea, but we did call it out because technically it is a separate type of tea. So all of those teas again have a similar amount of polyphenol antioxidants. I feel that just getting tea into your everyday is important. If you
Hmm.
aren't used to drinking tea every day, drinking an umami, astringent, fresh Japanese green tea first thing in the morning could make your stomach turn. It certainly did
Hmm.
mine when I first tried.
Hmm.
And now I crave it, and it's the first thing that I drink every morning. But I feel that what I tell people is drink the tea that you love the most because it's the one that you'll drink the most of. If I'm drinking down that green tea by the shot glass like it's medicine, and I can drink 3 mugs of my juicy black tea with no problem, I am ultimately going to get a lot more benefit from that black tea than I would from that one little shot of green tea that might taste like wheatgrass to me.
Yeah. I really love that recommendation. I think it's so much more accessible to people because even though I feel like a lot of people I work with like green tea and it's sort of okay to bring it into their routines, there are some people who really don't, or it upsets their stomach, or every time they drink it, they get heartburn or different things. And so I think that broadening it to you're still going to get a lot of these antioxidants and health benefits by drinking, these six different varieties of tea really opens up, I think, the possibility of getting tea into your routine.
Absolutely. And the other thing I might add is if you're in that category of person who thinks they don't like green tea and may just
Mm,
don't and never will, I would recommend that you go to a tea place if you have within your geography a Japanese tea room that you could go to that you know they're
mm,
going to steep it correctly. You might try that because they are finicky and they can go bitter very
hmm.
quickly. Or the other two recommendations that I would make are Genmaicha green tea is the one that's with the puffed rice and some roasty
Yeah,
bits. That's a lot easier to
that's
pellet
yummy.
on your
Yeah.
stomach. And
Hmm.
then these days, good quality matcha is available everywhere, and you can stir matcha into yogurt,
Yeah.
anything, and
Anything.
not really need to deal with the adverse kind of taste effects
Mm,
of, so to speak.
that's great. Yeah, that's a good reminder. You could even put matcha into a smoothie or something, right?
Yes,
Like it doesn't have to
exactly.
be a cup of hot tea per se.
Exactly. Yep.
Would there be time? So I actually wasn't aware, at least personally, I haven't ever tried the fermented tea that you mentioned. So what I would love to hear from you too, and just in general, obviously when we're thinking about cancer prevention, we think green tea, but just general health benefits and longevity and gut health and all these things are important, immune system, all the things. So would there be certain types of tea that you would go to for different things? Like you mentioned the fermented one for gut health, or what are kind of the
Absolutely.
go-tos for you?
So definitely the fermented one for Asian fermented. So pu'er tea, P-U apostrophe E-R. It's named after the village, a village in its region, which the whole region used to be named. That is bacteriologically active. It's a pre-probiotic. Yes, it's great for digestion. And if you don't love the taste of that, if it's got a little too much horse in it for you, there are plenty of blends that have that tea in it that make it a lot more palatable. Green tea is excellent for a little bit of energy over a long period of time. I was surprised about I don't know, a decade or 15 or God knows how many years ago. The Garmin cycling team was training in Boulder for the Tour de France, or they're based out of here, were based out of here. And somehow I met their doctor who made their secret tea. So they had an energy tea that they drank, and it was green tea based. And I was
Mm,
like, aha, very interesting. So here's this Chinese doctor, and of course, the tea is Chinese green tea based because it's your endurance tea. So whether you're an endurance athlete or a busy mom or a busy professional, you name it, that endurance beverage, aka green tea, is an excellent way to get you through your day, probably also benefiting you in drinking it in smaller doses kind of
hmm
throughout the day, right? Because those polyphenol antioxidants are most bioavailable on an empty stomach. So drinking tea with your meal isn't terribly useful from a health perspective. First thing in the morning and then between meals is really when tea should be consumed if you're after it for a health benefit. And so, kind of dosing that throughout the day, just as part of your hydration, just throw a few leaves into your tea bottle and a
mm,
water bottle, excuse me. And then white tea is the one that monks really focused on because it allowed them to stay barely awake for long periods of time. And
mm,
I love that tea in the afternoon when I do need to focus, but I definitely don't feel that I need an energy lift. And it just, with white tea, what the Chinese say is it's the taste between your teeth. It's really the qi that
mm.
tea brings you. And there are a few white teas that I've tried in my life and a few raw pu'er teas. So there are green pu'er teas that are a huge favorite of mine that literally, and I've probably only had certainly not 5 cups in my life, but probably 3, 4-ish cups of tea in my life when I have had a sip and literally it felt like it just changed my whole psyche, where
Wow.
it just took you out of yourself to an incredible place. And yes, there are molecules in tea which are psychoactive, and I don't mean that it made you feel crazy. It made you immediately centered. It was half an hour of meditation in one sip, essentially. And that to me
That's
is
incredible.
magic when you can
Yeah.
reach that in it. And I was even in a puer class last week. I did a week-long puer stage in Paris with a bunch of tea professionals. And there was one woman that I sat next to from Switzerland. One of those few cups of tea that I had was at that class. And when she drank it, she burst into tears. And every time she drank it, she burst into tears. And I'm like,
Wow.
what is wrong with you? We became friends over the week. She said, it's too much chi for me. You know, you can't help but recognize that it's in there.
That's incredible. I've
Yeah.
never heard that before. Wow. So it's interesting because this month we're focusing on plants and food, like the ways we nourish ourselves to help us stay healthy and cancer free. But the month before, which is when we're filming this right now in February, we're talking about nervous system and stress and emotional health. And tea can, based on what you're telling me here, in addition to herbal infusions, of course, but like teas can serve a role there too, right?
Absolutely. I feel that certainly I came to tea for its biochemical benefits to my system, right? You wanted it to protect you, to enhance your immune system, to bolster it after it's been knocked down by disease and chemotherapy, etc. And that's what brought me to tea, and what we do know that it works so well for. And oddly, 20 years ago, or sorry, when my book came out 10 years ago, that's what I would have focused on primarily. But now that, knock on wood, I have continued to be disease-free for another decade, I am kind of appreciating more those other benefits of
Mm,
tea, and perhaps certainly having listened to your February broadcasts on your podcast, it has just made that all the more apparent and vivid in terms of people. Because I have a tea business, of course, we also wonder about, we only want to serve teas that are going to make people's lives better. But people repurchase tea for two reasons: because it tastes great and because
hmm
it makes them feel good. And yes, feeling good is not only the physical, oh wow, I feel like I haven't had a cold. That actually is a very interesting anecdotal piece of evidence, which of course I don't have any immediate research on in my company, but which is certainly very well documented in the medical literature, and that is the lower incidence of colds and even colds and flu in people who drink tea regularly. So over the course of my company's history over the last 20 years, so we're between 35 and 40 people, but probably I've had about 100 employees who've come and gone. And people come, they start drinking tea. It's free, it's there. There's a lot of them. They taste good. And all, guaranteed, more than half of them, about 9 months later, go, it's nuts. I haven't had a cold since I came to work at the tea spot.
hmm
That's interesting. In researching this Cancer versus Tea book that's coming out this coming summer, of course, I added an antiviral section, right? Because people did turn to tea, and more than 98% of COVID cases in China were actually dealt with in terms of herbal medications and tea. But one of my favorite studies far predates COVID, and it's about children who grow up on tea gardens in Japan versus children who grow up in regular villages and cities in Japan that aren't on tea plantations. And so it is a population study. It doesn't say, oh, these kids on the tea gardens are drinking 3 to 5 cups of tea a day. It doesn't have that type of quantitative measure in there, but it does talk about days of absences from school. I don't
hmm
know if the tea garden parents are simply more stringent about not missing school, but they miss 3 times less school than the other kids. So just that whole cold and flu correlation, and there they were really focusing on influenza. So these kids were
hmm
not catching flu, which is very interesting.
So, right. So just another, and when we think about the health benefits, a lot of it is preventative, is keeping you strong,
Absolutely.
keeping you healthy so that you can fight off the things you might be exposed to in the world.
Yeah.
Even that very original study you mentioned with the Japanese after the radiation exposure and
Yes.
how the green tea protected them from the radiation. So I think we can really think of it as a protective way we nourish ourselves.
Yes. And I haven't gone completely TCM, Chinese herbal medicine in my,
hmm
not by a long shot. I do all my doctor's appointments here in
hmm
Colorado and very much Western medicine people, but practitioners. But one time I recall working in China with a colleague, a Chinese colleague, and she said, "Oh, I need to go. I have a doctor's appointment." I said, "Oh my goodness, what's wrong?" She said, "Nothing's wrong." And you're like, okay, then why are you going? I'm going to the doctor, and just that concept that I learned 20 years ago or so, that you go to the doctor just like you would go get an oil change on your car or make
hmm
sure that your tire pressure is good or get your
hmm
bike tuned up. And
Yeah.
that to me, it sounds so naive because we have gotten a whole lot better about preventative medicine in the US in the last few decades. But that to me was a real mind trip that, oh, wow, this doctor's collecting money and my friend's not even sick. But no, it's such a
Yeah.
wonderful philosophy. And then when she came back, I asked, so what happened? He asked about just how I've been feeling, my bowel movements, my relationship with my husband, you name it, all of these things that could point to what could potentially lead them to want to look a little more in depth on a certain.
Mhm.
Of course, he took her pulse first. He decided that it was they didn't need to do a blood test after having gone through that initial screening at that visit. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think ultimately it could save us a lot of time, money, and worry in Western countries if we did focus a
Hmm.
lot more on just knowing where we are every day, waking up in the morning and saying, even little things like these biometric, my cardiologist now, I'm not wearing it, but likes for me to wear my Aura ring so that
Yeah.
I have
For
an
your
idea as
HRV
to where I'm
data.
hanging out.
Yes.
And that biofeedback is so very valuable. Like you sometimes don't make the correlation that, oh, if I stay up and work until 11 or midnight, it's not going to be as happy a morning when I wake up the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the preventative piece, I think, particularly when we look at traditional Chinese medicine or East Asian medicine or some like older or even Ayurvedic philosophies, like older philosophies than our kind of modern day Western medical approach, is looking deeper at the rhythms of the body and really thinking about wellness as a root cause piece. Is let's keep the chi flowing, let's keep things optimal so you don't create a problem down the road, hopefully. And that is a very different way to think about medicine, in my opinion, a much healthier way to think about medicine. But yeah, that doesn't surprise me that in China that's what she was doing. That's beautiful. Okay, let's talk about buying tea. Now, you have a tea shop. So, this is also very, you're very versed in this. So, buying tea, what are the things that we really need to look for? If we want to maximize the benefits, the health benefits, or even the calming, the stress supporting benefits of tea, what should we be looking for? I'm assuming we're not just going to the store and grabbing like the bags of tea. Tell me what we should be keeping an eye out for.
So if you're purchasing tea for wellness as
Hmm.
your motivator, you want to look for the freshest tea you can get. And that's difficult sometimes to ascertain when you go to the grocery store because everything's packaged up and you don't see anything.
Hmm.
So I would advocate, again, not all of us have bulk tea shops where we can go in our town. I would advocate going to kind of as nice a tea shop as you can find with as much diversity in it as you can find. And first, just tasting teas, because it's a lot cheaper to buy a cup or a pot of tea instead of investing in a quarter pound or a pound and then not even knowing whether you're necessarily brewing it perfectly at home. That's kind of I don't like to take that kind of financial risk. Even if
Hmm.
it's for $10, I'd rather pay three and get a cup of tea and know I love this or I'm done with this.
Yep.
So I would definitely advocate starting, and unfortunately, not at most chain kind of coffee shops, but at a place where you see that you've got people who are brewing leaf tea. And that doesn't always mean that it's not in a sachet. People oftentimes get full leaf tea and put them either in pyramid sachets in a machine, as we do in our company,
Mm.
or at the tea shop or hotel. They put them in their own kind of bags that you can fill, each one individually. But take a look at the freshness of the tea. Now, of course, with black tea, that's a lot harder to ascertain because black tea looks, old and decrepit's not a nice term for it, but it doesn't look fresh. But if you're after green teas, it's very clear from sight and aroma and even kind of the feel of the leaves. You'll learn after a while, even though they are all dry, who's fresher and who's more stale. Fresh
Okay.
is better for your body in terms of the polyphenols that you're going to pull out of there. Fresh is always better. And then I would go with going back to what you like. So decide what is your style. Some people, and in my company even, it's so interesting. People are all over the place with not everyone has the same favorite teas, not by a long shot. And tea
Hmm.
is so much more diverse than, let's say, coffee. You might focus in on an Ethiopian or a Colombian, Costa Rican, but tea, my goodness, you've got not only the six different tea types, but then within each tea type, you've got hundreds of different regions. The terroir is so important, and budget plays into it a lot. So, frankly, You will find, and you can also tell by taste, and we can all tell by taste. You do not need to be a tea sommelier to be able to tell if a tea is fresh or stale. That is
Mhm.
just like telling if a piece of bread is fresh or stale. We can all figure that out. So, again, I would go with what you love. If you're about the functional benefits, then yes, black tea is really good for keeping your breath fresh, for that kind of bacterial kind of cleanup stuff, your digestion. Green tea is more about the immunity and the steady energy. But I would figure out what I love to drink the most. And even though we probably carry well over 100 teas at my company now, I hesitate to say, I probably go back to about the same 12 teas, and two or three of those are herbals. So,
Mhm.
another big, actually, section in my new book is something that has become a lot more prevalent in cancer care in the last decade, and that is adaptogenic teas, which really
Mhm.
kind of came into the limelight during COVID because people
Mhm.
needed calm. And adaptogens, even though Camellia sinensis, green tea, is an adaptogen, it's not a primary adaptogen. But primary adaptogens are all caffeine-free herbal, to
Mhm.
the best of my knowledge. I'm stating that like it's, but they are all herbal. They are all non-tea, the primary adaptogens. And those are used more and more. And there's so many studies just in the last 5 years about adaptogens used as a complementary therapy as people are going through cancer care because it is stressful. It is stressful both physically and mentally. And what adaptogens do is they can take a physical stressor. So these are herbs that were classified only in the mid 20th century by Soviet doctors when they were coming up with substances for combat pilots to be able to deal with stress. You know, you go up, you're flying at Mach whatever the heck, and you get shot at. That's stressful, right?
Yeah.
So that's a moment of stress, but of course, that's not a chronic stress. That is a moment of stress, but they need to come right back to center in order to be able to pull their next maneuver or whatever. Adaptogens help us get back to center, whether the stress is something that spun you up or took you down. So if you got kind of a depressing piece of news, or are in a physical slump, energy wise, an adaptogen can bring you back up to center. If you've gotten that, that either shot at as a fighter pilot, or I guess the rest of us maybe pulled over by a cop for speeding, you've had that up in the air kind of stress, the adaptogen will bring you back to center. Similarly, black tea is really good at regulating cortisol levels. So, after a stressful event, if you can have black tea rapidly, and if you
Mhm.
think to the Harry Potter novels, when something stressful happens, they're like, Hagrid will say, "Come in, have a cup of tea."
It's
So,
true. They did. Yeah.
yes, it is. So, both adaptogens and black tea are actually really good at helping us regulate quickly back to that center.
Do
And
you
I
have some
am
favorite
fascinated.
adaptogens? Just
I'm
before
sorry?
we move on from that, do you have some favorite adaptogens?
I do. So I love, and they're getting harder and harder to find. I love rhodiola,
Mm.
which we used to use in our adaptogenic chai. We've now changed it to be ashwagandha chai. And honestly, I don't know if it contains rhodiola any longer or not. I know one of the problems was getting that one. I do also love lion's mane mushroom, and I'm in the final throes of coming up with a matcha latte blend that has lion's mane mushroom in it. So these are all substances which during the pandemic I just started very intense research on, both in terms of how myself and my customers enjoyed them and in terms of what's in the literature. So
Hmm.
reishi and chaga mushroom we also love very much. But rhodiola ashwagandha is the huge one, and that's what my customers, if I had to say the crowd
Hmm.
favorite, ashwagandha and Tulsi holy basil. And yeah, personally, I love rhodiola because it tastes great. A lot of adaptogens kind of taste like mushrooms and twigs, and which they
Mhm.
are in large part.
Thank you for that because I do think that is an important piece to even just in our work with clients is coming up with ideas, different ideas to help like the adaptogen pieces build resilience in the body too. So it's calming that stress response. I love the way you said coming back to center. I think that's a really good way to think about it and also build resilience to future stressors because obviously moving through a cancer
Exactly.
journey is incredible. Like you're going to continually be bombarded with stress. So what are the things that are going to kind of help hold your resilience? And I love, all the ones that you suggested, I think are really great ideas for people to bring in. And the fact that, like you mentioned, the blend you're working on with the matcha and the lion's mane, like it also doesn't have to be just the one, right? You can combine these so that you're getting multiple benefits in your cup or two or three, depending on how
Exactly.
many you're drinking. Yeah. Okay, so when we purchase tea, because I was just thinking about this in relationship to, so you're mentioning like obviously it makes sense to me that fresh is better. It's going to be more potent. It's the same when we buy spices, cooking spices, herbs, same idea, right? Even the concept of grinding your own spices versus buying already powdered spice is going to help preserve the freshness. So I'm very familiar with that concept. And we also have sort of this timeline of thinking when you buy spices, for example, ideally you don't buy them in necessarily huge quantities because you want to try to get through them
So true.
within a few months, maybe 6 months tops, because then it's like the benefits start to decrease. So I'm curious, is that a similar truth for tea, or what would you recommend for that?
It is. And one of the reasons I feel that my company has a very loyal customer following is because we are real sticklers about freshness. There's nothing in my warehouse that is older than the last season of tea. I don't
Mm,
know, that was very awkwardly said, but
yeah.
essentially, it's important when you're drinking a green tea. So at this time in 2026, you shouldn't drink anything that's older than a 2025. So the
Hmm.
2026 green teas have not yet been harvested. The very first Chinese harvests will happen Qingming, so very early April, and then the Japanese ones. It all depends on the climate that year, a little bit thereafter, but probably closer to May, June, and then they'll be available to us in the summer. 2025 green teas are just now starting to taste a little meh to me because the new
Okay.
ones are just around the corner, a few months away. Frankly, yeah, so since you can't get a brand new green tea right now, saying that 1 year on green teas and white teas should be your limit in practice, I feel that it's more like 9 months. You kind of,
Hmm.
and if you get a super high-end Japanese green tea in Japan, it will have an expiration date, a best by date of 6 months on it, which is
Okay.
very, very osé, as you would say in French. And I'm sorry, I don't have the American word, but yeah, so really gutsy. We have expiration dates of 2 years on our teas, but
Mm.
black teas, frankly, I've pulled black teas and pu'er teas get better with age. I've pulled 7 and 8 year old black teas out of weird places that I didn't know they were stored, and they're just as good as they were on day one. So it depends on the tea.
Yeah.
And the leaves that look closer to a fresh tea leaf get stale faster. And the black, really
Hmm.
oxidized teas, no, they probably don't lose much with time. They probably fare quite well.
Like a wine.
Exactly. Totally.
Okay, that makes sense. So the greens, the whites, maybe the herbals as well. You want to be more mindful about how old they
Yeah,
are.
and there it depends on the herbal. Something like, I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I love fruits, so not exactly herbal or leaf. For instance, there are blends that we add Valencia orange peel to, and oh my
Mm.
gosh, when that first comes in, it's
Oh, that
just
sounds
so
amazing.
delicious, so amazing. And so citrus peels, of course, you want them as fresh as humanly possible. Something like valerian root, I don't know, that poor sucker, he smells the same no matter
Yeah.
how long he sticks around. And I
Yeah.
don't know if it loses its potency in terms of helping induce,
Mm.
sleep or not over time. I don't know as much about herbs as I do about
Yeah.
tea. I'm sorry.
I no, that's okay. I think we could probably extrapolate even just to like the culinary herbs and spices because I would say
True.
like roots are going to last longer. So when you
Yeah,
mentioned like valerian root, like it would make sense, or dandelion root, the root is not going to degrade as quick as a leaf or like a
I think you're right.
flower
Like
or a
ginseng.
bud.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So you could even just maybe use that as a
totally.
guide.
Whereas peppermint, peppermint
Exactly.
that's
It's
a
more
few years
delicate.
old smells sad. Yeah.
Yes, well said. Yeah, I agree. Oh my gosh, this is so great. So I want our listeners to be inspired to start drinking more tea, starting with whatever you enjoy, but taking into hopefully some of the recommendations that Maria shared with us today. And I would love for people to also be able to connect with you because the tea spot, I know it's a local, it's a place, but you do sell teas
Well,
online
we're not
too,
a
correct?
retail place. We are a warehouse with no entry.
Okay, so
If
you're
you
not,
don't
people
work
aren't
there, you
coming
do not
in
come in.
and
No, we
drinking a
don't.
cup of tea.
No.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
we definitely set up tours for groups who want to come, and if anyone is ever in Colorado in the Front Range and wants to come, please reach out. I would happily host you there. I am readily available on Instagram. I need to work harder on that, but I am M. Uspenski on Instagram and easy to find. And the T Spot is easy to find on Instagram and social media. And our email is info@theteaspot.com. You can always reach out and say, hey, want to speak with Maria about this? And I will hear about it shortly.
Great. Okay. So then your business is actually set up to ship tea to people.
Yes,
So we
yeah.
can order.
Online is our retail portal. We used to
Okay.
have people
Perfect.
come and show up before COVID and pick up their
Yeah.
orders, but no longer. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This is actually great for our listeners
Yeah.
because now that's much easier. And we'll
Yes,
make
and
sure in the
we
show
have a
notes, we'll have all
great
the
customer
links.
service group that are very engaged, live people available to
Yeah.
you during our business hours always, but certainly overnight on email. And we love engaging with customers. We go over our customer reels, both positive reviews and if anything didn't work out for them.
Mhm.
Every week we go over every customer interaction because it's very important for our company and how we move forward. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is great. Can I have it shipped to France too? Is that possible?
Absolutely. Yes, I was going to
Okay.
ask you for, I don't think you can order and have it shipped to France. I don't know, but I do want
No.
your address, Dion, and
Okay.
there will be tea shipped to France, let's just say.
Worst case scenario, I maybe when you come to Paris, I can visit
Yes,
you in person at some point, or when I
that
come to
sounds
the States,
amazing.
I can
That
also
sounds amazing.
order some tea while I'm
Yes.
there. Thank you so much for joining us. This was such a delightful conversation. Before we wrap up, I always like to ask because maybe I didn't ask something that's like top of mind for you, but is there anything else you would like to add or share
I
before we
think
say
the only
goodbye?
thing that I would emphasize is that I hope that I didn't in any way discourage people who love herbal teas from their herbal
Mm,
teas, because the history of herbs, non-tea herbs used in medicine is even older than the history of tea.
yeah.
So there are even more herbs than there are different kinds of teas in the world with many very valid benefits. Even though my specialty is in Camellia sinensis and tea, strictly speaking, I embrace herbs wholly. And I mean, at our company, we certainly do herbs a big honor as well. And herbs are very important to us and our customers, and certainly to people's health. But we would be here for another 10 hours if we
Right.
delved into all of the health benefits that we can
Yeah, that's for
take
another
out.
show.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
thank you for saying that though, because there's obviously a lot of benefits from herbal tea
Yes.
too. Maria, thank you again so much. I will make sure we'll link to all of the resources in our show notes. So if you guys want to connect with Maria, you'll have all the ways that you can do that. And thank you, as always, so much for listening. Please help spread the word so we can get this information into as many ears as possible. That's how we do this, how we get this information out there. And I look forward to meeting up with you all again soon in a coming episode. Bye, everyone.